After we have already laid down and cleared down already what love means on different language as that of Hebrew and Greek, on the image of God and image of man in the Old Testament, and then two aspects of the image of man and teachings of Jesus, love of God and neighbor. We now go to the part 2 of our report on Deus Caritas Est with Brother Christian Guerrero. The part 2, the practice of love by the church as community of love. There are 5 parts of this. First is the charity as a responsibility of the church, justice and charity, charity in social context, the essential elements of Christian and ecclesial charity, and lastly, those responsible for the church's charitable activity. After that, we have already cleared down on what love means, because love is the misunderstood, misused word. We already cleared down on that of Greek, Hebrew, and the image of God and man on Old Testament, the 2 aspects of image of man, and lastly the teachings of Jesus of love of God and neighbor. First, charity is the responsibility of the church. The word charity gives ambiguous meaning, for the word charity refers to the virtue of love, a central element in the life of the church, while on the other hand, charity also means giving alms and relief to those in want. So the charity that is indicated in the charity that points to love is explained in the first part of the encyclical, while the second part of the encyclical points to the second meaning, which points out on the providing resources or relief to those who need. The love of God, the love of neighbor is the greatest commandment, is somehow explained by Pope Benedict by giving the words, love of neighbor, grounded in the love of God. This word brings out a responsibility for each Christian faithful to be a means to help the particular church and even the universal church at large. Means that as a church, as a community, a church, everyone must practice love. The awareness of such responsibility is being manifested in the early Christian community as that of Acts chapter 2 verses 44 to 45. All who believed were together and had all things in common, and they sold all their possessions and goods and distributed them to all as any had need. The church's deepest nature is expressed in her threefold responsibility of proclaiming the word of God, that is kerygma, martyria, celebrating the sacraments, liturgia, and exercising the ministry of charity in diaconia. These duties presuppose each other and are inseparable. For the church, charity is not a kind of welfare activity which could equally well be left of others, but is a part of her nature, an indispensable expression of her very being. The church of God's family in the world. In this family, no one ought to go without the necessities of life. Yet, all the same time, caritas, agape, extends beyond the frontiers of church. The parable of the Good Samaritan remains as a standard which imposes universal love towards the needy whom we encounter by chance, whoever they may be, without in any way detracting from this commandment of universal love. The church has also a specific responsibility. Within the ecclesial family, no member should suffer through being in need. The teaching of the letter to the Galatians is emphatic. So then, as we have opportunity, Let us do good to all, and especially to those who are of household faith. The second topic is justice and charity. Instead of contributing through the individual works of charity to maintaining the status quo, we need to build a just social order in which all receive their share of the world's goods and no longer have to depend on charity. There is admittedly some truth to this argument, but also much that is mistaken. It is true that the pursuit of justice must be fundamental norm of the state, and that the aim of a just social order is to guarantee to each person, according to the principle of subsidiarity, his share of the community's goods. The relationship between the capital and labor now became the decisive issue, an issue which in that form was previously unknown. Capital and the means of production were now the new source of power, in which concentrated in the hands of a few led the suppression of the rights of the working classes, against which they had to rebel. In order to define more accurately the relationship between the necessary commitment to justice and the ministry of charity, there are two fundamental situations need to be considered. First, the just ordering of the society and the state is a central responsibility of politics. As Augustine once said, a state which is not governed according to justice would be just a bunch of thieves. Justice is both the aim and the intrinsic criterion of all politics. Politics is more than a mere mechanism for defining the rules of public life. Its origin and its goal are found in justice, which by its very nature has to do with ethics. The state must inevitably face the question of how justice can be achieved here and now. The church role then is not to overrule the state in which any of its ways, but to help to purify reason and to contribute here and now to the acknowledgement and attainment of what is just. The church's social teaching argues on the basis of reason and natural law, namely, on the basis of what is accord with the nature of every human being. It recognizes that it is not the church's responsibility to make this teaching prevail in political life. The second one is love, caritas in Latin, which always proved necessary. Even in the most just society, there is no ordering of the state so just that it can eliminate the need for a service of love. Whoever wants to eliminate love is preparing to eliminate man as such. There will always be suffering, which cries out for consolation and help. There will always be loneliness. There will always be situations of material need where help in the form of concrete love of neighbor is indispensable. The mission of the lay faithful is therefore to configure social life correctly, respecting its legitimate autonomy and cooperating with other citizens according to their respective competence and fulfilling their own responsibility, even if the specific expression of ecclesial charity can never be confused with the activity of the state. It still, it, it still remains true that the charity must animate the entire lives of the lay faithful, and therefore also their political activity live as social charity. The third topic is charity in social context. There are two points for this. The means of mass communication have made our planet smaller, rapidly narrowing the distance between the different peoples and cultures. And the second one is that This situation has led to the birth and growth of many forms of cooperation between state and church agencies, which have borne fruit. Church agencies, with their transparent operations and their faithfulness to the duty of witnessing to love, are able to give a Christian quality to the civil agencies too, favoring a mutual coordination that can only redound to the effectiveness of charitable service. The fourth topic is the essential element of Christian and ecclesial charity. And there are 3 points to consider in this topic. First, following the example given in the parable of the Good Samaritan, Christian charity is first of all the simplest response to the immediate needs in specific situations: feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, caring for and healing the sick, visiting those in prison, and etc. They need heartfelt concern. Those who work for the church charitable organization must be distinguished by the fact that they do not merely meet the needs of at the moment, but they dedicate themselves to others with heartfelt concern, enabling them to experience the richness of their humanity. Consequently, in addition to their necessary professional training, these charity workers need a formation of heart. They need to be led to that encounter with God in Christ, which awakens their love and opens their spirit to others. Second, Christian charitable activity must be independent of parties and ideologies. It is not a means of changing the world ideologically, and it is not at the service of the worldly stratagems, but it is a way of making present here and now the love which man always needs. Third, charity, furthermore, cannot be used as a means of engaging in what is nowadays considered proselytism. Love is free. It is not practiced as a way of achieving other ends. But this does not mean that charitable activity must somehow leave God and Christ aside. For it is always concerned with the whole man. Often the deepest cause of suffering is the very absence of God. Those who practice charity in the church's name will never seek to impose the church faith upon others. They realize that a pure and generous love is the best way and witness to the God in whom we believe and by whom we are driven to love. And last topic for this part 2, those responsible for the church's charitable activity. The Directory for the Pastoral Ministry of Bishops explored more specifically the duty of charity as a responsibility incumbent upon the whole church and upon each bishop in his diocese. And it is emphasized that the exercise of charity is an action of the church as such, and that, like the ministry of the word and sacrament, it too has been an essential part of her mission from the very beginning. With regard to the personnel who carry out the church's charitable activity on the practical level, the essential has already been said. They must not be inspired by ideologies aimed at improving the world, but should rather be guided by the faith which works through love. Interior openness to the Catholic dimensions of the Church cannot fail to dispose charity workers to work in harmony with other organizations in serving various forms of needs, but in a way that respects what is distinctive about the service in which Christ requested of his disciples. This proper way of serving others also leads to humility. The one who serves does not consider himself superior to the one be served. However miserable in his situation at the moment may be, When we consider the immensity of others' needs, we can, on the other hand, be driven towards an ideology that would aim at doing what God's governance of the world apparently cannot, fully resolving every problem. Or we can be tempted to give in to inertia. As such, a living relationship with Christ is decisive if we are to keep on the right path without falling into an arrogant contempt for man, something not only unconstructive but actually destructive, or surrendering to a resignation which would prevent us from being guided by love in the service of others. Prayer, as a means of drawing ever new strength from Christ, is concretely and urgently needed. Finally, faith, hope, and charity go together. Hope is practiced through the virtue of patience, which continues to do good even in the face of apparent failure, and through the virtue of humility, which accepts God's mystery and trusts Him even at times of darkness. Faith tells us that God has given His Son for our sake and gives us the victorious certainty that it is really true. God is love. It thus transforms our impatience and our doubts into sure hope that God holds the world in His hands, and that, as a dramatic imagery of the end of the book of Revelation points out, in spite of all darkness, He ultimately triumphs in glory. Faith, which sees the love of God revealed into the pierced heart of Jesus on the cross, gives rise to love. Love is the light, and in the end, the only light that can always illumine a world grows dim and gives us the courage needed to keep living and working. Love is possible, and we are able to practice it because we are created in the image and likeness of God, to experience love, and in this way to cause the light of God to enter in the world. That is the invitation I would like to extend with the present encyclical. And if truly we love others, we can share this through giving what they need, not of the spare we have, but giving what is right and just for them. Thank you. God bless. And may God bless you and keep you away from harm, now and always in this time of pandemic.